Captain Sarah Chen had always been invisible in the right ways and visible in all the wrong ones. At 28, she possessed reflexes that could thread a needle through a hurricane, and spatial awareness that made her fellow pilots shake their heads in amazement. Yet somehow every promotion passed her by like clouds drifting. Beyond her cockpit window, the morning sun painted the Nevada desert in shades of amber as Sarah walked across the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base. Her flight suit was pressed to perfection, her boots polished until they reflected the vast sky above. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of, even if nobody else seemed to notice. "Chen, you're on transport duty again," announced Major Patterson, barely glancing up from his clipboard. The dismissal in his tone was nothing new. Sarah had heard it countless times over the past 3 years. While her male counterparts were assigned to the flashy fighter jets and complex combat missions, she found herself ferrying supplies and flying reconnaissance missions that any rookie could handle. Sarah nodded without complaint, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had learned long ago that protesting would only make things worse. The military was still very much an old boys' club, and women had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. But Sarah wasn't just any woman. She was a pilot whose skills bordered on the supernatural. Her journey to this point had been anything but smooth. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, Sarah had spent her childhood with her nose pressed against the fence of the local airport, watching planes take off and land with the devotion of a religious pilgrim. Her father, a mechanic, had encouraged her dreams while her mother worried about the dangers of flying. When Sarah announced at 16 that she wanted to become a fighter pilot, half the town laughed and the other half looked concerned. The path through the Air Force Academy had been grueling. Sarah excelled in every academic subject and physical challenge, but she truly came alive in the cockpit. Her instructors noticed something special about the way she handled aircraft. She seemed to understand the machines on an instinctual level, as if she could feel their heartbeat through the controls. During training flights, she would execute maneuvers that left seasoned pilots speechless. One instructor, Colonel Williams, had pulled her aside after a particularly impressive demonstration. "Chen," he had said, his weathered face serious, "I've been flying for 30 years and I've never seen natural ability like yours. You have something that can't be taught." But even his recommendation hadn't been enough to fast-track her career once she entered active duty. Now, 3 years later, Sarah found herself walking toward another transport plane for another mundane mission. The C-130 Hercules sat on the tarmac like a patient workhorse, reliable but unglamorous. As she performed her pre-flight inspection, she couldn't help but glance over at the sleek F-22 Raptors lined up in the distance. Those were the birds she longed to fly, the pinnacle of aviation technology, machines that could dance through the sky like deadly ballet dancers. The F-22 Raptor represented everything Sarah had dreamed of as a child. With its stealth capabilities, supercruise technology, and unmatched maneuverability, it was the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Only the elite of the elite were chosen to pilot these machines, and the selection process was notoriously difficult. Sarah had applied twice and been rejected both times, not because she lacked the skills, but because she lacked the connections and the right profile that the selection committee seemed to prefer. Her current mission was simple enough: transport medical supplies to a forward operating base in Afghanistan. It was important work, she told herself, even if it didn't require even a fraction of her abilities. Lives depended on these supplies reaching their destination safely, but as she climbed into the cockpit and began her system checks, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was capable of so much more. The irony wasn't lost on her that while she flew transport missions, some of the men who had graduated from flight school after her were already flying combat sorties in advanced fighters. They weren't necessarily better pilots. In fact, Sarah had outperformed most of them during training, but they fit the image that the military brass had in mind when they pictured a fighter pilot. During the long flight across the Atlantic, Sarah's mind wandered to her childhood dreams. She remembered building model airplanes in her bedroom, reading every aviation magazine she could get her hands on, and studying the biographies of famous pilots. She had particularly admired the women who had broken barriers before her, pilots like Jacqueline Cochran, and the women Air Force service pilots of World War II. They had faced even greater obstacles than she did, yet they had persevered and proven themselves in the skies. What Sarah didn't know was that her reputation was quietly spreading among those who mattered. While the promotion boards and assignment officers seemed oblivious to her talents, the maintenance crews, air traffic controllers, and other pilots had taken notice. They spoke in hushed tones about the way she could land in impossible weather conditions, how she always brought her aircraft back without so much as a scratch, and how she seemed to have an almost mystical connection to whatever machine she was flying. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had worked on aircraft for over 20 years, often told his crew, "That Chen girl has something special. Mark my words, one day everyone's going to know her name." But for now, Sarah remained in the shadows, her extraordinary abilities hidden behind routine assignments and bureaucratic oversight. As the transport plane crossed over the Mediterranean Sea, Sarah adjusted her heading and checked her instruments with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed these actions thousands of times. The aircraft responded to her touch like a well-trained horse responds to a skilled rider. Every control input was precise, every adjustment perfectly calculated. Flying for Sarah wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was about achieving perfect harmony between human and machine. Little did she know that thousands of miles away, events were already in motion that would soon thrust her from the shadows into the spotlight. A crisis was brewing that would require not just any pilot, but a pilot with exceptional skills, unshakable nerves, and the kind of instinctual flying ability that couldn't be taught in any manual. The military's oversight of her talents was about to become a problem they couldn't ignore, and Sarah Chen was about to get the chance she had been waiting for her entire career. The sun was setting as her transport plane approached its destination, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Sarah smiled slightly as she prepared for landing, unaware that this routine mission would be one of her last flights in anything other than the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. The secure communication came through at 0347 hours, jolting the entire base into high alert. Sarah had just returned from her transport mission and was grabbing a quick coffee in the pilot's lounge when the klaxon began wailing. The sound sent chills down every spine on base. It was the emergency alert that meant something serious was happening. Within minutes, pilots were running toward the briefing room, their faces grim with anticipation. Sarah hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should even bother attending. Emergency briefings were usually for combat pilots, not transport jockeys. But something in the urgency of the alarm convinced her to follow the crowd. The briefing room was packed with the base's elite pilots, their flight suits bearing the patches of various fighter squadrons. Sarah found a seat in the back, trying to make herself inconspicuous among the sea of confident faces. At the front of the room, General Morrison stood with an expression that could freeze water. Behind him, multiple screens displayed satellite imagery and tactical information that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Gentlemen," the general began, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, "we have a situation." The room fell silent. At approximately 0200 hours, our intelligence assets detected unusual activity near the Iranian border. What appeared to be a routine patrol turned into something much more serious when we lost contact with a reconnaissance team operating in Syrian airspace. Sarah leaned forward, her attention completely focused on the general's words. The mission he was describing sounded like exactly the kind of complex operation she had always dreamed of being part of. The team was conducting surveillance on suspected weapons facilities when they discovered something unexpected. General Morrison continued. They managed to transmit partial intelligence before going dark, but what they found suggests an imminent threat to regional stability. We need eyes on target immediately, and we need them there fast. The general clicked to the next slide, which showed the technical specifications of the mission. Sarah's heart began to race as she read the requirements. High-altitude reconnaissance, potential enemy surface-to-air missiles, electronic countermeasures, and a flight profile that would push both pilot and aircraft to their limits. "This is a job for our most experienced F-22 pilots," the general announced. The stealth capabilities and advanced sensors of the Raptor make it the only aircraft capable of penetrating enemy airspace undetected and gathering the intelligence we need. Major Jackson, the squadron's top pilot, raised his hand. "Sir, what's the timeline for this mission?" "We need wheels up in 6 hours, the general replied. "Which brings me to our first problem." He paused, and Sarah could see the frustration in his eyes. "Major Thompson is in Germany attending his daughter's wedding. Captain Rodriguez is in the hospital with a broken leg from yesterday's training accident. Lieutenant Commander Williams is on emergency leave due to a family crisis. The room began to buzz with concerned whispers. Sarah counted quickly in her head. 3 of the base's 4 qualified F-22 pilots were unavailable. That left only Major Jackson, and she could see from his pale expression that something was wrong. "Sir," Major Jackson said quietly,
"I need to disclose that I've been experiencing some dizziness and nausea since yesterday."
"The flight surgeon grounded me this morning pending medical evaluation. They suspect it might be an inner ear infection." The general's jaw tightened. "Dr. Peterson, what's Major Jackson's status?" The flight surgeon stood up from where he had been sitting near the front. "I'm afraid the major is grounded until we can rule out vertigo, sir. Flying a high-performance aircraft with a potential inner ear issue would be extremely dangerous." A heavy silence fell over the room. Sarah could see the general's mind working, trying to find a solution to an impossible problem. The mission was critical, time-sensitive, and now they had no qualified pilots available to fly it. "Sir," came a voice from the middle of the room. "What about bringing in pilots from other bases?" General Morrison shook his head. "The nearest F-22 qualified pilots are at Langley, and even with the fastest transport, we couldn't get them here and briefed in time. We need someone who's already familiar with our operational procedures and security protocols." Sarah felt her heart pounding as an idea began to form in her mind. She knew she shouldn't speak up. She was just a transport pilot, invisible in a room full of fighter jocks. But the mission sounded critical, and she knew she had the skills to fly it even if nobody else realized it. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah found herself standing. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room, "I'd like to volunteer for the mission." The room erupted in surprised murmurs and a few poorly concealed chuckles. Sarah felt dozens of eyes turning toward her, some curious, others openly skeptical. She had never felt more exposed in her life, but she kept her chin up and her voice steady. General Morrison looked confused. "Captain Chen, isn't it? You're a transport pilot. This mission requires someone qualified on the F-22. "Yes, sir, I understand that," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. "But I've been studying F-22 systems and procedures for 3 years. I've completed all the academic requirements and passed the simulator tests. I just haven't had the opportunity for actual flight time." Major Patterson, her immediate supervisor, stood up with an embarrassed expression.
"General, I'm afraid Captain Chen is mistaken about her qualifications."
"She's an excellent transport pilot, but the F-22 is an entirely different animal." Sarah felt a flush of anger, but kept her voice professional. "With respect, sir, I've logged over 200 hours in the F-22 simulator. My scores were consistently in the top 5%. I've also completed advanced weapon systems training and electronic warfare courses on my own time." The general looked intrigued despite himself. "Why haven't you been advanced to F-22 training, Captain?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see Major Patterson shifting uncomfortably, and she realized that this was her moment, her chance to finally break through the barriers that had kept her grounded in mediocrity. "I believe, sir, that my applications for advanced fighter training may have been overlooked due to administrative priorities," she said carefully, not wanting to directly accuse anyone of discrimination. General Morrison turned to his aide. "Colonel Peters, pull Captain Chen's file immediately. I want to see her training records, simulator scores, and qualification status." As they waited for the file, Sarah could feel the weight of every stare in the room. Some pilots looked at her with newfound interest, others with skepticism, and a few with what might have been respect. She had just put her entire career on the line, and she knew that if she was wrong about her abilities, she would probably never fly anything more advanced than a cargo plane again. The aide returned quickly with a tablet containing Sarah's records. General Morrison's eyebrows rose as he scrolled through the information. "These simulator scores are remarkable," he said quietly. "And you've completed weapons systems training that isn't even required for transport pilots." He looked up at Sarah with new interest. "Captain Chen, you're telling me you believe you can fly a combat mission in an F-22 despite never having actual flight time in the aircraft?" Sarah's mouth was dry, but her voice was clear. "Yes, sir. I believe I can complete this mission successfully." The room was dead silent as everyone waited for the general's decision. Sarah knew she was asking for the impossible, for someone to trust a transport pilot with the military's most advanced fighter jet on a critical mission. But she also knew that desperate times sometimes created opportunities that would never exist under normal circumstances. General Morrison closed the tablet and looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "Captain Chen, if I'm understanding correctly, you're volunteering to risk your career and possibly your life on the belief that you can fly a mission that our most experienced pilots would find challenging." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. The general was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that could affect not just Sarah's future, but potentially the success of a critical intelligence operation. Finally, he made his decision. General Morrison's decision came after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. "Captain Chen, report to the F-22 maintenance hangar immediately. You have exactly 4 hours to prove you can handle that aircraft or this conversation never happened." The room exploded into whispered conversations as Sarah made her way toward the exit.
She could hear fragments of comments, some supportive, others doubtful, and a few openly hostile.
But she blocked them all out, focusing instead on the enormous challenge that lay ahead. She had just talked her way into the most important test of her life. At the hangar, Sarah found herself face to face with the sleek, angular beauty of the F-22 Raptor. Up close, it was even more impressive than she had imagined. The aircraft seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, its stealth coating giving it an almost otherworldly appearance. This was the machine she had dreamed of flying since she was a child, and now she had just a few hours to prove she was worthy of it. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for her, along with 2 other senior mechanics who looked skeptical about the whole situation. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said with his characteristic directness, "I've heard about your simulator scores and they're impressive. But this isn't a simulator. This machine will kill you faster than you can blink if you don't respect it." Sarah nodded solemnly. "I understand, Chief. I'm not taking this lightly." "Good," Rodriguez replied, "because neither are we. We've been working on these birds for years and we know every bolt, every system, every quirk they have. If the general is crazy enough to let you try this, then we're going to make sure you're as prepared as humanly possible." For the next hour, Sarah underwent the most intensive aircraft orientation of her career. The mechanics walked her through every system, every switch, every indicator light on the F-22. They explained the subtleties of the flight controls, the sensitivity of the throttles, and the complex relationship between the various computer systems that made the aircraft fly. What surprised Sarah most was how intuitive everything felt. Despite having never sat in an actual F-22 cockpit, the layout and controls seemed familiar, as if she had been flying this aircraft for years. Her thousands of hours studying technical manuals and her time in the simulator had prepared her better than she had realized. "The biggest difference you'll notice from the sim," explained Staff Sergeant Martinez, "is the sheer power. When you light those afterburners, you're not just accelerating, you're being shot out of a cannon. The G-forces are real, the vibrations are real, and if something goes wrong, the consequences are real." Sarah listened intently to every word, filing away information that could mean the difference between success and disaster. She asked detailed questions about engine response times, flight control sensitivity, and emergency procedures. The mechanics were impressed by the depth of her knowledge and the intelligence of her questions. Finally, it was time for her check ride. Colonel Stevens, one of the most experienced F-22 instructors on the base, would accompany her in the 2-seat trainer version of the aircraft. Stevens was known for his exacting standards and his ability to push pilots to their limits. If anyone could determine whether Sarah was truly ready for this mission, it was him. "Chen," Stevens said as they walked toward the aircraft, "I want you to understand something. I've been flying fighters for 22 years, and I've seen a lot of hotshot pilots who thought they could handle anything. Most of them learned the hard way that confidence and ability are 2 very different things." "I understand, sir," Sarah replied. "I'm not here because I think I'm better than anyone else. I'm here because I believe I can do the job that needs to be done." Stephen studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Let's see what you've got." The pre-flight inspection took 45 minutes with Stevens watching Sarah's every move. She checked each system methodically, following the exact procedures she had memorized from countless hours of study. When she found a minor discrepancy in one of the sensor readings, Stevens raised an eyebrow. "Most pilots would have missed that," he commented. "Detail matters," Sarah replied simply. Once they were strapped into the cockpit, Sarah felt a rush of excitement unlike anything she had ever experienced. The F-22's cockpit was a masterpiece of aviation engineering, with displays and controls that seemed to anticipate her every need. As she powered up the systems, she felt the aircraft come alive around her, its computers synchronizing with her inputs. "Take your time with the engine start," Stevens advised. "These aren't the turboprops you're used to." Sarah nodded and began the engine startup sequence. The twin Pratt & Whitney engines came to life with a whisper that gradually built to a controlled roar. The power was incredible. She could feel it thrumming through the airframe, waiting to be unleashed. Ground control cleared them for takeoff, and Sarah taxied the F-22 toward the runway with smooth, confident inputs. The aircraft responded to her touch like a thoroughbred racehorse eager to run. As they lined up on the runway center line, Stevens gave her final clearance. "This is it, Chen. Show me what you can do." Sarah advanced the throttles, and the F-22 began to accelerate down the runway. The acceleration was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It felt as though invisible hands were pushing her back into her seat as the aircraft gathered speed. The runway markers flashed by faster and faster until Sarah pulled back on the stick and felt the magical moment when the aircraft left the ground. They were flying. The sensation was extraordinary. Sarah had logged thousands of flight hours in various aircraft, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer exhilaration of controlling the world's most advanced fighter jet. The F-22 climbed effortlessly into the clear Nevada sky, its powerful engines pushing them upward at an angle that would have been impossible in her transport planes. "How does it feel?" Stevens asked over the intercom. "Like coming home," Sarah replied honestly. For the next 2 hours, Stevens put Sarah through a comprehensive series of tests. They practiced high-G turns, high-altitude maneuvers, emergency procedures, and complex navigation tasks. With each exercise, Sarah's confidence grew. The aircraft responded to her inputs as if it could read her mind, and she found herself pushing the envelope further than she had ever dared in a simulator. The most challenging test came when Stevens simulated a complete electrical failure at 30,000 feet. Sarah had to rely on backup systems and manual flight controls to bring the aircraft back to a safe landing configuration. It was exactly the kind of emergency that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. Working purely on instinct and training, Sarah managed the emergency with a calmness that impressed even Stevens. She methodically worked through the emergency checklist while maintaining control of the aircraft, never showing a sign of panic or uncertainty. When they finally touched down safely, Stevens was quiet for a long moment. "In 22 years of flying," he finally said, "I've never seen anyone adapt to the F-22 that quickly. You have something special, Chen. Something that can't be taught." As they climbed out of the cockpit, Sarah saw General Morrison waiting near the hangar. His expression was unreadable, but she could see Colonel Peters and several other senior officers standing with him. Her fate was about to be decided. "Well, Colonel Stevens?" the general asked. Stevens removed his helmet and looked directly at the general. "Sir, Captain Chen is not just qualified to fly the F-22, she's a natural. I've never seen anything like it." General Morrison nodded slowly, then turned to Sarah. "Captain Chen, congratulations. You've just been temporarily assigned to the 27th Fighter Squadron. Your mission briefing begins in 1 hour." As the reality of what had just happened sank in, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had achieved her lifelong dream of flying the F-22, but now she had to prove herself in actual combat conditions. The easy part was over. Now came the real test. The mission briefing room had been cleared of all but essential personnel. Sarah found herself sitting at a table with General Morrison, Colonel Stevens, and 3 intelligence officers whose faces she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was tense, professional, and charged with the urgency that comes before dangerous operations. "Captain Chen," began Major Williams from Air Force Intelligence, "what you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels. This information cannot leave this room under any circumstances." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The large screen at the front of the room flickered to life, showing satellite imagery of a remote region near the Syrian-Iraqi border. The terrain was mountainous and desolate, perfect for hiding military installations from prying eyes. 48 hours ago, our reconnaissance team discovered what appears to be a sophisticated weapons manufacturing facility. Major Williams continued. The initial intelligence suggests they may be producing advanced surface-to-air missiles with technology that shouldn't exist in that region. Sarah studied the images carefully, her pilot's eye automatically calculating flight paths, potential threats, and escape routes. The facility was nestled in a valley between two mountain ranges, making it naturally protected from most forms of aerial surveillance. The problem, Colonel Stevens interjected, is that we lost contact with our ground team before they could transmit complete intelligence. We know something significant is happening at this facility, but we don't know exactly what or when. General Morrison leaned forward, his expression grave. Recent electronic intelligence suggests they're preparing to move something important. If we're going to gather actionable intelligence, it has to be within the next 12 hours. After that, whatever they're hiding may be gone forever. Major Williams clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed tactical analysis. This is why we need the F-22. The facility is protected by multiple layers of air defense systems, radar installations, surface-to-air missile sites, and electronic warfare capabilities. Any conventional aircraft would be detected and engaged before getting close enough to gather useful intelligence. Sarah absorbed every detail, her mind already working through the challenges. The mission profile was exactly what the F-22 had been, designed for penetrating heavily defended airspace using stealth technology while gathering critical intelligence. Your mission objectives are threefold, General Morrison explained. First, confirm the nature of the weapons being produced at this facility. Second, identify any potential threats to regional stability. Third, locate our missing reconnaissance team if possible. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about proving herself as a pilot. People's lives potentially hung in the balance, and the intelligence she gathered could affect military planning for months or years to come. "Sir?" Sarah asked. "What's the expected opposition?" Colonel Stevens pulled up a threat assessment chart. Intelligence suggests at least 6 active radar installations, multiple mobile SAM sites, and the possibility of enemy fighter aircraft in the region. The good news is that their radar systems are older generation technology that the F-22's stealth capabilities should be able to defeat. Should be? Sarah noted the qualifier. "Nothing is guaranteed in combat," Stevens replied honestly. "Stealth isn't invisibility. If you fly the wrong profile, get too close to certain radar types, or if they've upgraded their system since our last intelligence update, you could be detected." Major Williams added more details about the specific intelligence requirements. Sarah would need to fly a complex pattern over the target area, using the F-22's advanced sensor suite to photograph the facility, intercept communications, and identify any unusual electromagnetic signatures that might indicate advanced weapon systems. "The flight profile is going to push you and the aircraft to the limits," Stevens explained. "You'll need to maintain radio silence for most of the mission, navigate using only GPS and inertial systems, and stay below the radar coverage while still getting close enough for detailed intelligence gathering." Sarah studied the proposed flight path, noting the way it wound through mountain valleys and utilized terrain masking to avoid detection. It was an elegant solution to a complex problem, but it would require precise flying and split-second timing. "What about contingency plans?" she asked. General Morrison nodded approvingly at the question. "If you're detected or engaged by enemy forces, your priority is to escape and return with whatever intelligence you've gathered. The F-22's speed and maneuverability should give you significant advantages in any engagement. But remember, this is primarily an intelligence mission, not a combat operation." The briefing continued for another hour, covering weather conditions, fuel calculations, emergency procedures, and communication protocols. Sarah took detailed notes, asking specific questions about timing, routing, and equipment settings. By the time they finished, she had a comprehensive understanding of every aspect of the mission. As the other officers filed out of the room, General Morrison asked Sarah to stay behind. When they were alone, his formal demeanor softened slightly. "Chen," he said quietly, "I want you to understand what's really at stake here. The intelligence we've gathered suggests that someone is supplying advanced weapons technology to groups that pose a serious threat to regional stability. If we're right, this could be the beginning of a significant shift in the balance of power in the Middle East." Sarah felt the full weight of the mission settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about proving herself as a pilot. It was about gathering intelligence that could prevent a larger conflict. "Sir, may I ask why you're trusting me with this mission?" she said. "I mean, I appreciate the opportunity, but there must be other options." General Morrison was quiet for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Chen, I've been in the Air Force for 28 years. I've learned to recognize exceptional talent when I see it, regardless of where it comes from. Your test flight today wasn't just impressive, it was extraordinary. Colonel Stevens has been flying F-22s for 8 years, and he said you handled that aircraft better than pilots with 10 times more experience." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "But more importantly, this mission requires someone who can think independently, adapt to changing circumstances, and make critical decisions under pressure. Your record shows that you've consistently demonstrated those qualities, even in routine transport missions." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. Finally, someone had recognized her true capabilities and was giving her the chance to prove herself on the highest stage. "Thank you for this opportunity, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," General Morrison replied. "But Chen, I need you to promise me something. If the situation becomes untenable, if you're detected or engaged by superior forces, you get out of there. The intelligence is important, but not more important than your life. We can find other ways to gather information, but we can't replace you." After the general left, Sarah remained in the briefing room, reviewing her notes and visualizing the mission profile. She had 4 hours before takeoff, and she intended to use every minute to prepare. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for her entire career, and she was determined to make the most of it. As she studied the satellite images one more time, Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the calm focus that came over her before every important flight. Her nervousness was transforming into anticipation, her anxiety into determination. Tomorrow she would finally get to show the world what she was truly capable of. The F-22 Raptor was waiting for her on the flight line, fueled and armed for the most important mission of her career. Sarah Chen, the invisible transport pilot, was about to become someone who could no longer be ignored. At 02:30 hours, Sarah walked across the darkened tarmac toward her F-22 Raptor. The aircraft sat silhouetted against the star-filled Nevada sky like a predator waiting to hunt. Ground crew members moved around the plane with practiced efficiency, performing final checks and confirming that all systems were ready for the mission. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez met her at the aircraft. "Ma'am, she's ready to go. All systems check green, full fuel load, and the sensor package is calibrated for your specific mission parameters." He paused, then added quietly, "Bring her back safe, Captain. And yourself, too." Sarah appreciated the sentiment more than she could express. "I will, Chief. Count on it." The pre-flight inspection took 30 minutes, with Sarah examining every inch of the aircraft that would carry her into hostile territory. The F-22 was loaded with advanced intelligence gathering equipment instead of weapons, emphasizing the reconnaissance nature of her mission. Everything had to be perfect. There would be no opportunity for mechanical issues once she crossed into enemy airspace. As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of becoming one with the aircraft. The F-22's advanced systems came online with quiet efficiency, displays illuminating to show her the status of every component. She worked through her pre-flight checklist methodically, double-checking each item against her written notes. "Raptor 01, this is Watchdog," came the voice of the AWACS controller orbiting safely in international airspace. "We show you approaching the operational area. Radar picture is currently clear, but we're detecting increased electronic activity from your target zone." Sarah acknowledged the transmission and began her descent toward the mission altitude. The F-22 stealth capabilities worked best at specific altitudes and speeds, and she needed to be in the optimal configuration before entering potentially hostile airspace. As she descended through 30,000 feet, she switched off her external lights and activated the aircraft's full stealth mode. The landscape below began to change as she approached the Syrian border. The Mediterranean's blue waters gave way to the brown and tan colors of desert terrain, broken by occasional cities and the geometric patterns of agricultural areas. Sarah checked her navigation system one final time, confirming that she was exactly on course for her planned ingress route. At 25,000 feet, Sarah began the most challenging part of her flight. The mission plan called for her to descend to low altitude and use terrain masking to avoid detection by enemy radar systems. This meant flying through mountain valleys at high speed, with minimal room for error. One mistake could send her aircraft into a mountainside or expose her to enemy fire. She pushed the F-22 into a steep descent, diving toward the rocky terrain at a rate that would have been terrifying in any other aircraft. But the Raptor handled the maneuver with ease, its advanced flight controls automatically adjusting to maintain optimal performance. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with high-performance flying, but her mind remained calm and focused. As she leveled off at 500 feet above the valley floor, Sarah was flying faster than the speed of sound through a corridor barely wider than a football field. The rocky walls flashed by on either side, close enough that she could see individual boulders and scrub vegetation. The F-22's terrain-following radar painted a three-dimensional picture of the landscape ahead, allowing her to navigate safely through the twisting valley. For 40 minutes, Sarah flew this demanding profile, making constant adjustments to avoid radar coverage while staying within the narrow corridor that would take her to the target area. The physical and mental demands were enormous. She had to process information from multiple sensors, maintain precise control of the aircraft, and navigate through terrain that left no margin for error. Finally, the valley began to widen, and Sarah saw her destination ahead. The weapons facility was exactly where the satellite images had indicated, a cluster of low buildings and camouflaged structures nestled in a bowl-shaped valley. But as she approached, Sarah realized that the intelligence briefing had not fully captured the scope of what she was seeing. The facility was much larger than expected, with multiple underground entrances and sophisticated camouflage that had hidden its true size from satellite surveillance. There were also significantly more vehicles and personnel than anticipated, suggesting a level of activity that made the site much more important than anyone had realized. Sarah activated the F-22's advanced sensor suite and began her intelligence-gathering passes. The aircraft's cameras captured high-resolution images of every building and vehicle, while electronic sensors recorded radio transmissions and radar signatures. She flew a careful pattern around the facility, staying at the edge of the surrounding mountains to minimize her exposure while gathering comprehensive intelligence. On her third pass, Sarah's electronic warfare systems detected something that made her blood run cold. The facility wasn't just producing weapons, it was actively loading them onto vehicles for transport. Large trucks were being loaded with crates that matched the signatures of advanced surface-to-air missiles, and she could see convoy preparations that suggested an imminent departure. But the most chilling discovery came when her sensors detected the electromagnetic signature of an active radar system that shouldn't have existed in this location. According to her mission briefing, the facility was supposed to be defended by older generation radar that the F-22's stealth capabilities could easily defeat. Instead, her electronic warfare systems were detecting emissions from a much more sophisticated system, one that might be capable of tracking stealth aircraft. Sarah made a split-second decision. Instead of completing her planned reconnaissance pattern, she maneuvered the F-22 to get closer to the radar installation. She needed to identify exactly what type of system they were dealing with, information that could be crucial for future operations in the region. As she approached the radar site, her worst fears were confirmed. The installation was not just more advanced than expected, it was actively scanning the sky with search patterns specifically designed to detect stealth aircraft. Someone had provided these people with technology that they should not have possessed. Suddenly, her radar warning receiver began chirping with increasing urgency. She was being painted by the enemy radar system, and the signal strength was building rapidly. Sarah realized with a shock that they had detected her despite the F-22's stealth capabilities. The mission had just become exponentially more dangerous. She banked hard to the right, diving toward the cover of a nearby mountain ridge while her electronic warfare systems attempted to jam the enemy radar. But she could see on her displays that multiple surface-to-air missile sites around the facility were coming online, their tracking radars searching the sky for her location. Sarah's training took over as she pushed the F-22 into evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible in any other aircraft. She skimmed the mountainsides at hundreds of miles per hour, using the terrain to break the enemy's radar lock while still trying to complete her intelligence gathering. The aircraft's advanced systems were working at their limits, processing threats and automatically dispensing chaff and flares to confuse incoming missiles. But Sarah knew she had gathered enough intelligence to make the mission a success, even if she had to cut it short. The photographs and electronic intelligence she had collected would provide analysts with a comprehensive picture of the facility and its capabilities. Now she just had to get home with the information. As she began her escape route through the mountain valleys, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in the past 24 hours. She had gone from being an overlooked transport pilot to flying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world on a mission that had already exceeded everyone's expectations. But the most dangerous part of her journey was still ahead, getting home safely with intelligence that could change everything. "Tower," came the voice of the air traffic controller. "You are cleared for takeoff when ready. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting." Sarah smiled at the unofficial send-off. "Raptor 01, roger." Beginning takeoff sequence. The twin engines spooled up with their characteristic whisper roar, and Sarah advanced the throttles. The F-22 accelerated down the runway with incredible smoothness, the landing gear retracting as soon as she rotated into the pre-dawn darkness. Within moments, the lights of Nellis Air Force Base fell behind her, and she was alone with the stars and her mission. The first phase of the flight took her across the continental United States toward the East Coast, where she would refuel before crossing the Atlantic. Sarah climbed to 45,000 feet, high above commercial air traffic, and settled into the long cruise that would carry her toward the mission area. The F-22's autopilot handled most of the flying, leaving her free to review mission parameters and study the intelligence package one more time. As she flew through the darkness, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been just another invisible transport pilot, ferrying supplies and equipment while dreaming of something greater. Now she was flying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, on a mission that could affect international security. The refueling stop at Joint Base Andrews went smoothly, with the ground crew treating her with the respect accorded to F-22 pilots. Word had apparently spread about the transport pilot who had talked her way into flying the most important reconnaissance mission of the year. As she climbed back into the cockpit for the transatlantic flight, Sarah noticed that several other pilots had gathered to watch her take off. 8 hours later, Sarah was approaching the eastern Mediterranean, flying at high altitude over international waters. The morning sun painted the sea in shades of gold and blue, but her attention was focused on the instrument displays showing her proximity to potentially hostile airspace. It was time to begin the dangerous part of her mission. Raptor 01, this is the first surface-to-air missile launched when Sarah was still climbing out of the valley system, its exhaust trail visible as a white streak against the brown mountainsides. Her radar warning receiver was screaming constant alerts now, indicating that multiple missile systems had acquired lock and were preparing to engage. Sarah's response was instinctive and immediate. She threw the F-22 into a violent turn that pulled nearly 9 Gs, the immense forces pressing her deep into her ejection seat. The aircraft's advanced flight controls automatically adjusted to maintain optimal performance, even under these extreme conditions, but Sarah could feel the edges of her vision starting to gray out from the acceleration. The missile streaked past her position, its proximity close enough that she could see the flames from its rocket motor. But there were more launches coming, and Sarah realized that her stealth advantage had been completely compromised. Whatever radar system they were using down there, it was tracking her with deadly accuracy. She dove toward the deck, using the F-22's incredible speed to put distance between herself and the missile sites. At this altitude, she was flying barely 50 feet above the rocky terrain, threading her way between boulders and ridgelines at over 600 miles per hour. It was flying that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits, but it was also her best chance of survival. A second missile exploded close enough to her starboard wing that she could feel the concussion through the airframe. Shrapnel rattled against the F-22's skin, and several warning lights flickered on her instrument panel. Sarah's heart pounded as she quickly scanned the displays, relieved to see that none of the damage appeared to be critical. But her relief was short-lived. As she climbed out of a narrow canyon, Sarah's threat warning system detected the distinctive radar signature of fighter aircraft approaching from the north. According to her intelligence briefing, there weren't supposed to be any enemy fighters in this area, but the electronic signals were unmistakable. Someone was vectoring interceptors toward her position. Sarah pushed the F-22's throttles to military power and began climbing rapidly. Air-to-air combat was completely different from evading surface missiles, and she needed altitude and speed to maximize her advantages. The F-22's superior climb rate and acceleration gave her a significant edge over most potential opponents. But she still didn't know what type of aircraft she was facing. At 20,000 feet, she finally got visual contact with the approaching fighters. 2 aircraft were climbing toward her from the northeast, their angular silhouettes and twin engines identifying them as advanced fighters that definitely should not have been in this airspace. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized that someone was operating sophisticated military aircraft from the facility she had just photographed. The lead fighter launched a missile while still at extreme range, more as a harassment tactic than a serious attempt to score a hit. Sarah watched the weapon's exhaust trail as it climbed toward her position, then executed a defensive maneuver that took advantage of the F-22's superior agility. The missile lost lock and detonated harmlessly several miles away. But Sarah knew that the real fight was just beginning. The enemy fighters were climbing aggressively, trying to close the distance where their weapons would be more effective. She had superior aircraft performance, but they had the advantage of numbers and local knowledge of the terrain. Sarah made a tactical decision that would have surprised her instructors. Instead of trying to outrun the pursuing fighters, she turned to engage them directly. The F-22's advanced sensors gave her a detailed picture of the enemy aircraft's capabilities and intentions, and she realized that she actually had significant advantages in a direct confrontation. The lead enemy fighter was closing to within missile range when Sarah executed a maneuver that demonstrated why the F-22 was considered the world's premier air superiority fighter. She pulled the aircraft into a vertical climb that bled off speed rapidly, then used thrust vectoring to rotate the nose toward her pursuer while still climbing. The result was a firing position that would have been impossible in any other aircraft. Sarah's AIM-120 AMRAAM missile launched with a puff of smoke and streaked toward the lead enemy fighter. The pilot attempted evasive maneuvers, but the advanced American missile was faster and more maneuverable than anything he could do. The warhead detonated just after the cockpit, and Sarah watched as the enemy aircraft rolled over and began its final descent toward the mountains below. The second enemy fighter pilot had witnessed his leader's destruction and was now flying much more cautiously, trying to use the terrain to mask his approach. But Sarah's advanced radar systems could track the aircraft even when it was partially hidden behind ridgelines. She maneuvered to maintain her tactical advantage while conserving fuel for the long flight home. The cat-and-mouse game continued for nearly 10 minutes. With both aircraft maneuvering for position while avoiding the mountainous terrain, Sarah was impressed by her opponent's skill. But the F-22's technological advantages were overwhelming. When the enemy pilot finally committed to an attack run, Sarah was ready. Her second AMRAAM missile found its target as the enemy fighter attempted to climb out of a valley. The explosion was visible from miles away, a bright orange fireball against the brown landscape that marked the end of the aerial engagement. With both enemy fighters destroyed, Sarah turned her attention back to escape and evasion. Her fuel situation was becoming a concern after the high-speed maneuvering and combat operations, and she still had a long flight back to friendly airspace. But more importantly, she was carrying intelligence that needed to reach American analysts as quickly as possible. As she climbed back to cruise altitude and headed west, Sarah began transmitting a coded burst message to the AWACS aircraft, still orbiting in international waters. The message was brief but contained the essential elements of what she had discovered. The facility was much larger than expected. It was actively preparing to ship advanced weapon systems, and it was defended by sophisticated radar and aircraft that indicated outside assistance. The response from the AWACS came back within minutes, congratulating her on mission success and providing updated navigation information for her return flight. But Sarah could hear the excitement in the controller's voice, and she knew that her intelligence was already being analyzed by experts who would determine its significance. The flight back across the Mediterranean gave Sarah time to decompress from the intensity of combat and reflect on what she had just accomplished. In the span of a few hours, she had proven herself as both a reconnaissance pilot and an air-to-air combat aviator. She had also gathered intelligence that would likely influence American policy in the region for months or years to come. But perhaps most importantly, she had finally demonstrated the skills that had been overlooked for so many years. Sarah Chen was no longer the invisible transport pilot who flew routine missions while dreaming of something greater. She was now a combat-proven F-22 pilot who had successfully completed one of the most challenging missions her squadron had ever attempted. As the sun began to set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Sarah smiled for the first time since beginning her mission. She had not only survived her first combat mission, she had excelled at it. The F-22 Raptor continued its westward flight, carrying both pilot and precious intelligence toward home and a future that would never be the same. The landing at Nellis Air Force Base 18 hours after takeoff was different from any homecoming Sarah had ever experienced. As her F-22 touched down on the familiar runway, she could see dozens of personnel gathered near the hangar, including several officers whose rank insignia she couldn't make out from the cockpit. Word of her mission's success had clearly preceded her arrival. General Morrison was waiting at the aircraft when she shut down the engines. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see Colonel Stevens and Major Williams from intelligence standing behind him, along with several people she didn't recognize. As she climbed down from the cockpit, her legs slightly unsteady after the long flight, the general stepped forward. "Captain Chen," he said formally, then broke into a rare smile. "Outstanding work. Initial analysis of your intelligence package suggests you've uncovered something much more significant than we anticipated." Over the next several hours, Sarah found herself in a series of debriefings that grew progressively more detailed and involved increasingly senior officers. The intelligence she had gathered painted a disturbing picture of weapons proliferation and foreign involvement in regional conflicts. The photographs she had taken showed not just weapons manufacturing, but evidence of technology transfer that violated multiple international agreements. But perhaps most importantly, her discovery of the advanced radar system and the presence of sophisticated fighter aircraft indicated that someone was providing military technology to groups that posed a serious threat to regional stability. The implications extended far beyond the original scope of her mission. "Captain Chen," said Colonel Bradley from Air Force Intelligence, "your mission has provided us with the most comprehensive intelligence we've had on this network in over 2 years. The information you gathered is already being analyzed by specialists across multiple agencies, and preliminary assessments suggest it will significantly impact our strategic planning in the region." During the technical debriefing, Sarah's combat engagement with the enemy fighters drew particular attention. Colonel Stevens, who had been skeptical about her abilities just days earlier, was now openly impressed by her tactical decisions and flying skills. "The way you handled that air-to-air engagement," he said, shaking his head in amazement, "was textbook perfect. Most pilots would have tried to run from a 2-against-1 situation. Instead, you turned the F-22's advantages into a decisive tactical victory." But the real surprise came 3 days later, when General Morrison called Sarah into his office for a private meeting. She expected another debriefing or perhaps discussion of her next assignment. Instead, she found herself facing a room full of senior officers, including some wearing stars that indicated general rank. "Captain Chen," General Morrison began, "your performance on this mission has attracted attention at the highest levels of the Air Force. Your tactical skills, intelligence gathering, and combat effectiveness have exceeded all expectations." The general paused, then continued with what Sarah could tell was carefully prepared remarks. "Based on your performance, you are being immediately promoted to Major and assigned as a permanent F-22 pilot with the 27th Fighter Squadron. Additionally, you are being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions during the mission." Sarah felt the room spinning slightly as the magnitude of what she was hearing sank in. In the space of a week, she had gone from flying transport planes to becoming a decorated F-22 pilot, with a promotion that usually took years to achieve. But General Morrison wasn't finished. "Major Chen, there's something else. Based on the intelligence you gathered and your demonstrated capabilities, you're being selected for a special assignment that will make full use of your unique skills. You'll be leading a new unit focused on high-risk intelligence operations using the F-22 platform." The assignment that followed was everything Sarah had ever dreamed of, and more. As the leader of a small elite unit of F-22 pilots specializing in reconnaissance and special operations, she found herself at the center of some of the most important missions the Air Force conducted. Her unconventional background and proven ability to think independently under pressure made her invaluable for operations that required both technical expertise and creative problem-solving. Over the following months, Major Sarah Chen became something of a legend within the Air Force community. Her story, the transport pilot who talked her way into flying the F-22 and then proved herself in combat, was told and retold throughout the service. But more importantly, her success opened doors for other overlooked pilots whose talents had been ignored by a system that too often valued connections over competence. Sarah's unit conducted dozens of successful missions over the next 2 years, gathering intelligence that shaped American foreign policy and prevented several potential conflicts from escalating. Her tactical innovations and leadership style became case studies taught at the Air Force Academy and other military educational institutions. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during a ceremony at the Pentagon, where Sarah was awarded the Air Force Cross for her continued exceptional service. As she stood at attention while the medal was pinned to her uniform, she thought about the young girl who had pressed her face against airport fences, dreaming of flying the most advanced aircraft in the world. General Morrison, now retired but present for the ceremony, approached her afterward. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time, "do you remember what I told you about recognizing exceptional talent regardless of where it comes from?" Sarah nodded, remembering their conversation in the briefing room that had changed her life. "Well," the general continued with a smile, "you've proven that sometimes the most valuable people are the ones everyone else overlooks. Your story has changed how we think about pilot assignments and career development. You didn't just prove yourself. You helped prove that talent exists everywhere, if we're smart enough to recognize it." As Sarah looked around the ceremony, she saw other pilots whose careers had benefited from the changes her success had inspired. The Air Force had begun looking more carefully at overlooked personnel, giving opportunities to pilots whose skills might have previously been ignored. It was a legacy she was proud of, not just her own success, but the doors she had opened for others. Standing in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, surrounded by the history of American military aviation, Major Sarah Chen reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisible transport pilot to one of the Air Force's most decorated F-22 pilots. She had proven that exceptional skills could emerge from unexpected places, and that sometimes the most important thing a leader could do was give talented people the chance to show what they were truly capable of. The ceremony concluded with a reception where Sarah was approached by dozens of young pilots, many of them women and minorities who saw her as proof that barriers could be broken and dreams could be achieved. As she spoke with them about their own aspirations and challenges, Sarah realized that her greatest accomplishment wasn't the medals or promotions or successful missions. Her greatest accomplishment was showing that in a world where talent often goes unrecognized, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step forward and say, "Give me a chance to show you what I can do." Sarah Chen had taken that chance, and in doing so had changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who would follow in her contrails across the endless sky.